Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello guys, I am back with another lecture. In this lecture we will study the marriage and classification of marriage. Marriage is actually classified into three different kinds, and we will discuss all the three different kinds in detail in this lecture. In previous lecture we discussed the marriage and the essentials of marriage in detail. So let's begin. We will discuss these points. Here is our outline. First of all, we will introduce marriage. Then we will define it according to Hidayah. Then we will define or discuss marriage according to Quran. Then according to Holy Prophet, and then we will come to the kinds of marriage, which are valid marriage, void marriage, and irregular marriage. We will discuss this in this lecture in detail, and we will then discuss the difference between void and irregular marriage and modes of avoiding irregular marriage. So let's come to the introduction. The Arabic word for marriage is aqd, which means to tie. Marriage is a social contract between husband and wife. It does not require any priest and it involves no sacramental rites. Definition according to Hidayah, nikah in the primitive sense means carnal conjunction. Some have said that it signifies conjunction generally. In the language of law, it implies a particular contract used for the purpose of legalization generation. The Holy Quran says about the marriage, marry those among you who are single or the virtuous ones, among your slaves, male or female. If they are in poverty, Allah will give the means out of His grace, because Allah is Rahman and Rahim. Holy Prophet says a woman should be selected because of her religion. He further says a woman is married for four things, that is her wealth, her family status, her beauty, and her religion. So you should marry the religious woman, otherwise you would be a loser. Now comes to the let's come to the classification of marriage. Marriage is classified as under number one is valid marriage, number two is void marriage, and number third is irregular marriage. Now, what is the valid marriage? Definition: a marriage which fulfills all the requisites of nikah in Islam is known as valid marriage. And we have discussed the essentials of a valid marriage in previous lecture. Now comes to the void marriage, that when the marriage is void. Definition: a void marriage is one which is unlawful in itself. It means it is unlawful from the very basic. The prohibition against the marriage being perpetual and absolute. So it is not marriage at all. It means the void marriage is not a marriage at all. For example, a marriage without the consent of either party. For example, a marriage under compulsion. A marriage prohibited on the ground of affinity. If you want to know about the affinity, stay tuned with us and watch the next lecture of affinity. A marriage with the wife of another person. A marriage prohibited on the ground of fosterage. In the next lecture, we will discuss affinity and fosterage in detail. So if you want to learn about the affinity or fosterage in detail, so watch the next lectures. Now come to the discussion about irregular marriage in details. Definition: in irregular marriage, the irregularities arise from the accidental circumstances, like here the circumstances are accidental, which can be corrected. A marriage without witnesses. If a marriage has took place and there are no witnesses present, so it becomes irregular marriage. A marriage with the fifth wife. Islam has allowed us 4 wives. So if you marry a fifth wife, it's called an irregular marriage. A marriage with a woman before completion her iddat is irregular marriage. As you know, iddat is of 40 days. So if 40 days are not finished and you married that woman, so it becomes an irregular marriage. A marriage prohibited on the ground of religion. A marriage with 2 sisters at the same time, it's also a kind of irregular marriage. Now we will differentiate the void and irregular marriage. Differences between void and irregular marriage. The difference between void and irregular marriage can be explained with the help of the following points. So here is a chart given. In chart there is a serial number, the difference void and irregular marriage. Number one comes legal position. What is the legal position of void marriage and irregular marriage? So we will discuss first void marriage, and after that we will discuss irregular marriage. So number one, legal position. Void marriage. Void marriage has no legal position because void marriage is not marriage at all. It is not a marriage. And irregular marriage is not unlawful in itself. Irregular marriage is not in itself unlawful. Serial number 2, prohibition. In void marriage, the prohibition is perpetual and absolute. But in irregular marriage, the prohibition is temporary, which means the prohibition can be cleared. Number third, legitimacy. In void marriage, the children born out of the union are not legitimate. In irregular marriage, the children born out are legitimate. Number 4, rights and obligation. In void marriage, no civil right and obligation arises. And why they don't arise? Because, as we have earlier stated, the void marriage is not a marriage at all. The law does not recognize any marriage which is void. In irregular marriages, if consummation takes place, some rights and obligations arises. Now, consummation is the point that if consummation takes place, so then some rights and obligation will arise in irregular marriage. Number 5, legal effect. A void marriage has no legal effect because the law does not recognize this type of marriage. An irregular marriage has legal effects after consummation. Number 6, modification. Now this is the point to be noted, that whether these marriages can be modified or not, whether a void marriage can be modified or not, or whether an irregular marriage can be modified or not. So modification means a void marriage cannot be modified into a valid marriage, and an irregular marriage can be modified into valid marriage by removing the irregularities. So now we will discuss the modes of avoiding irregular marriage. That if a person has contracted into irregular marriage, how he can avoid the marriage. So following are the three modes of avoiding irregular marriage. Number one, by the court. Now how one can avoid the irregular marriage in the court? The court can cancel the marriage if the matter is brought to its notice. By the husband can repudiate his wife. And by wife, the wife can also avoid the marriage by relinquishment.